Sure, I'll start. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It is very nice to see that we have a group of students looking into this important content related to career planning and financial literacy. My name is Fabian Bizama. I'm a physical therapist. I'm the assistant program director and assistant professor at the DPT program in Austin, the residential program.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Madeline Ratoza. I am an instructor in ACCE on the Austin campus in both the Flex and residential programs. And I'm excited to talk to you about this topic today.
And I'm Dr. F. Scott Feil. I teach for the Austin DPT Flex program. Teach all sorts of courses, PCM1, PCM2. I've taught INTEG, PTP1, PTP2, geriatrics, and most importantly, the business and admin course. So that is where my passion lays and why I am here today to kind of help talk about some options for you guys once you graduate.
And so we'd love to hear a little bit about what brings you all to tonight's presentation. So if you would put in the chat or unmute and tell us about what program you're in, so we know your discipline, as well as maybe a question or two you have for this evening. If you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to just directly message one of us, you could do that as well. But we'd love to get a sense of who everyone is.
And if we don't get any replies, I can just tell dad jokes all night too. I've been working on them.
No one wants to share what discipline they're in?
Oh, hi, this is Kathleen Dorius. I can't undo my video. I don't know. You can't see me.
Okay.
That's all right. We
That's
can
all
hear
right.
you.
Okay, hi. I am in the occupational therapy program at the St. Augustine campus. I'm in the Flex program. And I'm just here tonight to get more information.
Awesome.
Nice.
Welcome. We have somebody, Jeanette, in the chat, EDD/EL program.
Oh, very cool. Also jury duty. Sorry, Jeanette.
And jury duty, yeah.
Oh, sorry, not sorry. I'm sure it'll be a great experience.
Carly in the chat, DPT program at St. Augustine campus. Mary, OTD in Austin, graduating this August. Okay,
Nice. Student
congratulations.
loans
Mary.
are coming down the pike.
So ADD, PT, OT.
Awesome. That's really helpful to know. So this is meant to sort of be, we have some things that we're going to share presentation wise. We'll also like it to be reading more OT, PT. Awesome. So we're hoping it'll be a discussion. You guys can ask questions that you have. If you have any burning questions, you can put them in the chat or stop us. We're kind of going to go through, this is meant to be a discussion that you can come to having not gone through the course. There also is a Blackboard TDM course, which everyone has access to. It's built as a PT financial literacy course, but a lot of it is very relevant, especially if you're in the speech or OT programs, because our payment structures are so similar, and our debt to income ratios are so similar. So a lot of that will apply if you're in those programs. We see one person from the EDD program. Dr. Feil happens to also have an EDD, so that's good to know as well. So we have, this should be relevant regardless of what program you're in.
And side note, I did my transitional DPT and my EDD through St. Augustine as well. So I know the costs. I've been there, I've done that.
So I want you guys, has anyone, another OT, awesome. Has anyone been in the course? I know a couple people have completed it, but I don't know if anyone in this conversation tonight has actually completed the course on Blackboard. All right, so we'll just assume that nobody has, but if you have, that's great. And if you don't know that it exists, now you know it exists. It's meant to be asynchronous. You can complete it at your own pace, but it takes about 2 hours, and it links you through some resources and things to work through as well. But I just wanted to start with a little bit of an active thought activity. So this is something you can do on your own. And we're just going to take 1 minute, and I want you to just write down everything you envision for your first job out of school. What it looks like, where you live, what your salary is like, what patient population, or what, if you're not in a clinical program, what that job looks like. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? So just take a minute to think about that. So that's about a minute. Hopefully you've thought of a couple things that you envision for that first job after you finish whatever program you're in. Now I want you to look at your list, and I want you to circle the top 3 things on your list. If you only have 3 things on your list, great. But if you have more than that, I want you to prioritize just the top 3 and circle those items or highlight those if you're using an electronic tool. So that's a bit of a thought activity. So why do you guys think, and you can put this in the chat or unmute, why would I start this presentation sort of on financial literacy and career planning with this step? You need goals to know what you want to do with your money. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Thank you for sharing. To have a plan. Awesome. Instructors can chime in too if you'd like.
I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So I don't know how much help I would be, but I traveled my first year out of school because I just wanted to see the country, and the money was real good. And so I just decided that I'll figure out my goals while I'm working, and kind of did, actually. I ended up really enjoying outpatient and home health. So I kind of started there. That's where I dabbled. And then my career goals and decisions got better and better and better as I really started narrowing in and focusing on what I wanted to do. A couple of years in, started getting my feet wet a little bit more and rolling up my sleeves and diving into the nitty gritty of the real world.
Awesome. To have stability. Awesome. So I really like starting to think about career planning as you enter your career, and especially as you're thinking about how you're going to enter your career while also managing perhaps financial aspects of paying off loans, etc., with this activity. And I like to do that because oftentimes there's a lot of noise, especially as you exit the student lifestyle and into your career, right? You might have other classmates start to do something. They may say they want to say travel, right? And you say, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But if you haven't really done the thought work on your own priorities and what your own interests are, you may sort of get waylaid into something that is not a priority for you. So I like to do this activity at different times whenever I'm experiencing a shift or a change, or I feel like my job or setting isn't working out, and say, what do I really feel like I would need? So if I listed a whole bunch of things and I said I want this salary and I want to work in Austin because my husband's in Austin, and I want to work where I don't have to commute very far, and I also want to work in pediatrics and have a flexible schedule. Right? I can't necessarily have all of those things, because oftentimes, especially in your first job after exiting a PT, OT, or speech program, we may not have all the options in the world, but we may have some options. So if I go into a job board, or if I go into a conversation, or if I start applying for things, I'll have a sense of what's really important to me. And I really recommend doing this because it's very easy for us to get just distracted by things that may not be our own priorities. As we move into sort of debt payoff and sort of the finances of things, we have to think of sort of debt to income ratio as we're thinking about what makes sense for our career, and how we're going to sort of manage whatever debt we've accumulated in school and succeed in our path. So here is sort of an image of what debt to income ratio is. Debt to income ratio is a simple fraction where we have our monthly expenses, including student loans, car payments, mortgages, rent, credit card payments, etc., divided by how much we make in income. And then we have our debt to income ratio. So there are ways to manage finances that include both limiting expenses as well as increasing your income. And so we're going to go through just a few slides of talking about ways in which we can do each of these things within our careers, and then we'll sort of go through some different questions associated with that. Any questions before I move forward? Any comments?
I would add that that's part one. We start with what are the goals? What is it that you want out of your job? Because the decision regarding monthly expenses, income, and paying debt are going to be a little bit different for everybody based on those priorities.
Absolutely. There was a question in the chat, and we didn't really cover sort of our own process, and that might be helpful to know about, because each of us, we're all physical therapists, we all work in the PT program, but we have had different career journeys. So we'll just touch briefly on that. So if you have questions about those specific paths, you'll know like who to go to, I guess, would be helpful. So I am a physical therapist. When I graduated, I took an outpatient pediatrics job that I took after my last rotation. I only ended up working there for 4 months because I wasn't being paid enough to pay back my loan. Loan repayment for federal loans start 6 months after graduation. And I loved the job, but I didn't really think about how I was going to survive. And so I ended up having to leave very early on, which went against most of the recommendations I was given in PT school about, stay at a job for a year or two, but it just wasn't tenable. So then I worked at an outpatient clinic that was part of a hospital for about 4 years. I treated outpatient, but worked in the weekends on inpatient, made a lot of overtime money that way. I should also say I graduated with $200,000 in student loan debt, so I had a big chunk to pay off. I then moved into home health when I had kids. I worked in geriatric and pediatric home health. And then I entered academia full-time 2 years ago. And in March of this year, I made my last payment towards my loans. So I'm finished my loan repayment. I did not receive any forgiveness. I just paid it off pretty aggressively from the start. My first and most of my loan payments were about $2,300 a month. So very substantial towards those loans. And because of the uncertainty with when interest is going to kick back in for federal loans, they're technically not paid off. I just have all my loans sitting in an account, and I'll transfer it back to the federal government when interest kicks in, because right now it's just earning interest in the meantime with interest rates as they are. So that's the short version of my story. If you guys want to share yours.
Okay, I can go next. So mine is a older story. So that's also a big component of this. There's been a transition in our profession. So I completed my initial physical therapy degree as a master's degree. So a lot shorter and a lot less expensive. But I also went to a private university and I had student loans. And I had to go through this exercise as well, try to figure out, okay, what do I want to do next? Similar to what Dr. Ratoza was mentioning, I wanted to be in the pediatric field. So I sort of sacrificed the income a little bit and adjusted the monthly expenses to continue to live comfortable, but not as maybe not as much as I would have liked at the time. But it was okay because back at that time, the amount of debt was significantly less. So the amount of debt that I incur as part of that process was closer to 80,000. So I was able to pay it off within the usual amount of time without any major problems with high interest or significant impact on lifestyle and major decisions.
And I'm kind of in the middle of these two. I started as a master's program at ECU. I ended up doing the transitional doctorate and finishing that up at St. Augustine, and then went on for the educational doctorate at St. Augustine as well. And so I graduated with $140,000 worth of student loan debt, and 2 doctoral degrees, a master's degree, and a bachelor's degree, all in varied stuff to show for it. So it wasn't too bad. It wasn't great. But with some of the numbers that we're hearing coming out these days, it's definitely a little bit more manageable. For me, I generally tended to think I just want to pay it off as quick as possible. And so I had a side business where all of my money was just going to that, paying it down in big chunks until COVID happened and things got a little crazy, and I had time to slow down and really analyze what was going on and talk to a financial planner who kind of laid it out for me and said, with all that you're doing from a business standpoint, I was paying originally, it would have been $1,700 a month. I went into the income-driven repayment plan, which lowered it down to about $700 a month, and then eventually settled on the revised pay-as-you-earn plan, which then now makes it about $137 a month. So I take the difference in the $700 a month and the $137 a month, and I take that and invest it into either the business or other things that I'm working on, and investing in paying back that revised pay-as-you-earn plan, because at the end of the 25 years, it lowers the payment, but it then stretches it out over 25 years. And on that 25th year, that last amount, whatever's left, gets forgiven. That being said, you get taxed on that amount. So that's why I'm kind of investing in a separate account to pay that off on the 25th year. It's almost like you made income. So let's say I have $40,000 left on my loans, that 25th year, that gets forgiven, but I pay tax on that $40,000 as if it was part of my income. So if I made, say, $100,000 that year, it would be $140,000 in income, and I would get taxed on it. So that's why I'm paying into an investment fund as well to pay that 25th year off the taxes when it does come. So I know that that'll be covered and that's taken care of. So all kind of varying versions of student loans and different approaches to them, which is good because I think you guys need to hear all the possible options that are out there for you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we're going to go first into ways to talk about monthly expenses reduction, and then talk about ways to increase income. If you guys have any questions, just pop them in the chat or stop us. So I just want to point out that I do reference an APTA toolkit, which is a physical therapy toolkit. So if you're not in the physical therapy program, this will not be relevant, but the rest of the resources are available to anyone. So the first thing to do is to limit the accumulation of debt to the extent possible, right? And sometimes, especially in the media, it's suggested that this is very possible, that you can limit your debt expenses by cutting out coffee or something ridiculous like that, right? We can limit our debt to some extent, but a lot of us take out debt for school because we don't have anyone to pay for it for us, right? So within reason, I've also done some qualitative interview work with individuals that have dealt with student loan debt, and I've had a lot of people speak about the importance of taking out enough loans that you are able to live with going through school. So you can take out the minimum, and then if anything happens, you don't have anything left to cover, a car breakdown or something like that, and that can be very stressful, especially if you're going through a very difficult school process. So, I ended up with a lot of debt partially because I didn't want to have that stress in PT school apart from everything else that was going on, where I had a lot of classmates that took out less debt, but everything was stressful for them, like finding, figuring out how to pay for food, figuring out how to travel for clinicals, figuring out even how to commute to campus was stressful because they just didn't have any support there for what they took out for loans. So that's again a personal choice what you can manage. If you take out the minimum but can't get through school because it's so stressful, right? Financial stress is a real stress, and then that has to be considered as well. Budgeting mechanisms. So if you are in the PT program, APTA has a lot of resources on their site. And you can kind of go through that toolkit and put a budget in and plan them out. There's also a lot of cell phone apps. NerdWallet has this report of the best cell phone budget tools. I find that I'm not a great regular budgeter. Like, it's not something I want to do on a monthly basis, but especially if I'm transitioning into a new salary, a new situation, I might budget kind of regularly for 3 months, see what that's like, get myself under control with what I can spend and what I can't, and then I'll kind of just live my life according to that, right? But there are people that really want to do that budgeting on a regular basis, and there's a lot of good research into how that can be effective at managing your costs. The repayment programs and options, they're variable, right? We just described different payment options. So I was on a standard repayment plan where we just paid off over 10 years at a standard rate, and I just put more money into it than that rate, so it was less than 10 years overall. Dr. Feil discussed the revised pay as you earn, which is sort of a newer model, and there are now 8 or 9 different federal loan options, and it's it's expanded within the last year. It's probably going to have a new option coming out in the next month. It's all sort of up in the air still as to what's happening with the federal loans. But the federal government, if you go to their website, they actually have really good mechanisms for you to put in your information, and it'll tell you your options. So some of the those things did not exist even 5 years ago. So it's really cool. You can put in all your details, and it'll show you what your monthly payments would be and what the total interest accrued over time. So one thing to note with those repayment program options is if you do a 10-year program versus a 15-year program, the amount of interest you accrue over those extra 5 years is substantial. So you end up paying more on your loans if you take 15 years compared to 5 years. There are the programs, like Dr. Feil mentioned, where you can have a forgiveness amount at the end of a term period, whether it's 15 or 25 years, but that is taxable. So if you've allowed a large loan, like a $200,000 loan, to accrue over 25 years, then you might have a substantial amount forgiven. And that could be a substantial tax hit. And again, talking to a financial advisor, if you decide to go that route, is really important. So you're not going to get taxed $60,000 at the end of 25 years and not have a plan for it. And then a huge thing that is important is interest rate reduction. So if you have federal loans now, you know that we're in a 0% interest rate period. There are ways to reduce your interest rate even without a COVID situation. For instance, if you were to refinance your loans, one thing to consider with refinancing is if you have a federal loan, right? If you have any loan that was issued by the federal government, it has protections associated with that loan. So you might, if you go back to school, right? We've talked about all of us actually have gone back to school, right? I'm in a PhD program. Dr. Feil was in an EDD program. And Dr. Bizama finished his PhD program. So as we went back to school, our loans went into deferral, which meant we didn't have to pay them when we were in school, but our interest accrued during that time. That's a federal protection. If I had refinanced my federal loan into a private loan prior to going back to school, there would be no protection on that. I would have been required to pay whatever my private servicer demanded. If I refinanced a federal loan before COVID, I wouldn't have received the 0% interest. That was a COVID protection. So I've been yammering. So other instructors, if you want to chime in, expand on any of these things.
Not necessarily to add detail, but also to maybe provide a little bit of context. We're talking to you as students, a few of you almost getting to graduate. Your experiences are going to vary depending on your needs, but overall, I hope that you're thinking about this as stressful as it might be, as an investment in you as a person and an investment in your career that pays off over time. It really does. And we're talking specifically about the financial components, but some of the stuff that is very valuable, we might not be able to put a number to it, and it has to do with overall quality of life and enjoyment of what you do for your job. And then a comment regarding going back to school, that if you're interested in continuation certifications, or we're always looking for people interested in the academic world, there are companies that will do tuition reimbursement. So that could be an added benefit as well, right? So when you're looking for jobs, if there is one company that does tuition reimbursement, or they will pay a specialization certification type of thing, that could be an interesting proposition. So there's more things to consider as well as you continue on with your professional development.
Yeah, I worked for a workman's comp company that did tuition reimbursement. So while I was working for them, I had a certain amount of money each month that went towards my student loans. So I just kept working for them because that was nice at the time, and it was a good fit for while I was doing my dissertation. Overall, over the course of 3 years, the cost of their healthcare, their insurance went up, and the premiums kept going up as well. And eventually I wasn't making any more money. I wasn't getting a raise or anything. So I was actually losing money every year I worked for them because of their healthcare. But that's a whole nother story. So that's why I ended up leaving that company. However, I will say that if you do decide to talk to a certified financial planner about this stuff, and I would strongly recommend it, one, I found that it helps reduce the stress and anxiety. The more you know about it, the more you talk about it, the more you're open about it, just treat it as a thing, like it's just like a budget or something I have to do. It definitely reduces the stress and anxiety, but make sure that the certified financial planner understands student loans, because especially, rehab and health sciences student loans, right? Medical field student loans. Talk to somebody who specializes in that, because there are tons and tons and tons of certified financial planners, and they'll be really good with managing and handling your money and investing it and doing all that, but they have no idea what it comes to handling student loans. So make sure that they focus and specialize in student loans, because that's a whole separate piece of the puzzle. Because like Dr. Bizama was saying, there's going to be a different fit for everybody. Everybody's going to have different life goals, different life situations and settings. So it's going to be different for what payment plan to go into based on your life goals and your life settings. So once you have that figured out, then you can figure out the financial plan of, how to pay it off and how you're going to attack your student loans. So just make sure, caveat, you find a financial planner that does know something about student loans, especially ones that are getting specialized nowadays in just people in the medical field. So that's even better for us. So keep an eye out for those. Do you have any certified financial planners you'd recommend? Yeah, I've got one. I can chat with you afterwards for sure.
Do you want to share them with the group?
I can, yeah, sure. My certified financial planner specializes in DPT student loans, but he also has worked with other people in the medical field. His name is Chris Varela. I'll put it in the chat there. Chris at Varela financial.com. Shoot him an email and just let him know F. Scott Feil sent you over. He'll take care of you. He's phenomenal, and basically he is the reason that I completely changed my mindset on just throwing huge chunks from my business at my student loans, because now my business is thriving, and so I could have paid it off quicker. However, I've done better things with the money than would have been done if I put it into my student loans. So it was a complete mindset shift for me on how I was attacking my student loans, but it fit better for me and what I'm trying to accomplish. So, you know, the revised pay as you earn plan may not be a good fit for somebody who just wants to get that, you know, debt off their shoulders and, you know, live stress-free and stuff like that. So yes, Joe Ranke of FitBucks is another option too. He's his wife is a PT.
Any other questions here about these topics? Ways to limit the cost.
I have a quick question. This
Okay.
is Kathleen Boyce again. I am interested in working in inpatient in the hospital when I'm done with school. I'm in the sixth term right now. And do you think it's a good idea to start in the hospital so I can get help to get my loans to be repaid? Is that a good route to start off first, or no?
I would say it goes back to those priorities, right? So if you want to work in a hospital, then yes, you should work at a hospital. If you want to have your loans repaid, you have to do a government-based or a nonprofit system, then you should also work at a hospital that has that option, right? But if your passion is outpatient and you want to work in a hospital to repay your loans, then you might be in a situation where you're going to burn out because you're doing something you don't want to do, right? So again, go back to, is loan forgiveness really what you want, right? Is that what you're going for? Then you can look at any option that would be a nonprofit or federal system that would allow for loan forgiveness. Or is it a hospital that you just really are passionate about working in? Then absolutely work at a hospital. And we will go in the 2 slides over, we'll go through how payment structures differ based on setting type.
And when we talk about that, I'm going to come back and circle back around to my soapbox, 2 cents on what you should do. So we'll come back to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on? So here's how you can increase your income. And this is probably where your instructors differ the most about our opinions in this. And that's why it's good that we're all in the same place, right? So there's so many ways you could increase your income as a health provider, even, you know, we have one EDD. But it goes back to, does it fit with your priorities? Does it fit with you as a person and what you do? So having a second job, of course, will increase your income. There's a number of ways to have a second job. You can have a second job in healthcare. You can work, if you work outpatient, you can take PRN home health. If you work in hospital, you can take, you know, you can do cash pay on the side, right? There's a number of ways you can have a second job. You can also, I know a lot of PTs that do real estate, right? There's flexibility in opportunities for second jobs that are really available to us because we have various ways in which we can make money as healthcare workers. I had the opportunity to work in an outpatient clinic that was part of a hospital. So I worked every weekend in the hospital. Now that meant every hour that I worked in the hospital was time in, right? This was a substantial way where I could make really easy extra money working in the same system, working in the same employment. I didn't have to do anything fancy. I just showed up to work 1 extra day. My outpatient job was 4 10-hour days. So I actually only worked 5 days a week. But I worked that for 4 years, and that allowed me to really chunk away at my loans without, you know, Dr. Feil will go into his sort of the starting your own business aspect. Starting my own business is a stressful thing. I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to do that, right? But it was really easy to make money in overtime. Bonuses is an option in healthcare, although it's not guaranteed, right? So never take a job and they say we can offer these bonuses. Don't account for that in your salary, right? Say that's extra. If it's extra, I'll chunk it at whatever I want, but don't count on it to live. I will say one more thing and then I'll let you talk, Dr. Field. So the other way that you can change your income is by changing jobs. So oftentimes within an organization, especially if you're a staff therapist, OT, PT, SLP, there may not even be a lot of room to be anything other than a staff physical therapist. You might be able to be like a director, but that director may actually not have a huge income change from your staff role, or it may have a big income change, but the responsibilities are very different than your staff role as a physical therapist. So I was able to increase my income substantially just by changing jobs and changing settings. So usually home health, adult home health tends to be on the higher side, like up there with travel in terms of what you're reimbursed for. So I went from an outpatient therapy job to a home health job, increased my income by about 20-25% that year. Then I went to pediatric home health, which tends to be a lower paying opportunity, but I had been living at this higher income, and I happened to make a job change where therapists were not as present because it was over COVID. And so I just asked for what I would be making before in adult home health and was able to get that in pediatric home health. So it's sometimes timing, but also sort of I'm at the time when I worked in healthcare jobs, I was sort of a job site keeper. So I was always aware of what was going on, even when I wasn't looking for jobs. So that when I saw changes in the market, like I saw all of a sudden that there were more home health positions being available, I tied that to a lot of women, especially, were leaving pediatric home health during COVID. And so that was like all of a sudden these jobs were becoming available. And I was able to switch back into the sort of my passion setting where I wouldn't have been able to work there before and make enough money to live. So that was sort of my journey in those types of things. Now we get into business talk.
Yeah, so as much as we may differ, we also have a lot of things in common too that I tend to agree with. I think the biggest thing when it comes to choosing your why behind all this and setting your goals as to what's most important to you, I do agree that you should take the job that you love and that you're passionate about and that you want to do, because that'll make everything a lot easier. That'll make getting out of bed every day, and getting up and going to work. It really, for me, is a joy. I love what I do, right? So that makes things a whole lot easier. Even if it's a job that might pay a little lower, you can make up the difference. So let's say you find a job that'll pay you $75,000 in a setting that you really love and you truly enjoy it, but you need to make $100,000 in order to live comfortably and kind of get that student loan payment going, right, and covered. I say take the job you love and make up the difference elsewhere, right? And that's where I think things start to differ, because I did chase the money. I did early on in my career. I took outpatient after outpatient after outpatient after outpatient job, and all I did was keep changing jobs to move up the ladder financially. And while I did make more in every move that I made, it didn't make me happier. I actually was less happy the more money I made, not because of the money. It was mostly just because of the settings I was in and some of the places I worked for, one of which was actually pulling some shady maneuvers in Medicare, which is why I left that one right away. And they did eventually get busted for bad stuff. So that being said, I recommend starting your own business as a way to make up that difference, right? You don't have to jump all in, both feet, like, the heck with jobs, I'm just doing my own thing. You could, right? Don't let anybody tell you you can't. But I recommend starting it as a side gig or a side hustle. It doesn't even have to be in the world of healthcare. It can be healthcare adjacent or totally outside of healthcare, right? My wife does decorative sugar cookies, right? That's her side business. It's her only business. She's a stay-at-home mom, but she loves that. That's her thing, right? It's a small business, right? She does it at her own leisure. She loves it. And it makes a little money on the side, so she's happy, right? The benefit to me in starting your own business is the way that you get taxed, right? So you're going to get taxed significantly lower if you have your own business. And one of the cool perks is by having your own business, everything that you purchase for the business is a tax write-off. And what tax write-offs do is they lower your income at the end of the year so that you're paying in a lower tax bracket, right? So let's say, again, for math purposes, you make $100,000, you have a business that, you know, is just getting started, and you have maybe $10,000 worth of equipment that you purchased for the year to get the business up and running, right? Printers, a computer, ink cartridges, weights, a duffel bag, right? And stuff like that. You can end up taking that money and putting it towards, you know, write-offs. And then from there, you know, putting in for a lower tax bracket because you spent $10,000. So instead of the 100,000 you made, you actually really only made 90,000. So yeah, Monica says lost her job during COVID and opened a home care agency. Exactly. Perfect. That's great. Because again, to me, the taxation helps. But if you love what you do and you enjoy the business, you started the business because it is your higher calling. You want to do whatever that business is and you just love it. You live it. It makes it so much easier to keep going when times get tough, right? When things really are hard to figure out, and they will be, when there's downs in the market or there's, you know, turns in well, like COVID, right? Nobody could have seen that coming. And when things get tough, if you truly love what you're doing and you're passionate about it and you've found your true zone of genius, that makes things so much easier to just keep trying to figure out and pivot until you get it right. And eventually, if you keep doing the same things and repeating this stuff and figuring it out along the way, it is unreasonable to think that you would fail at that thing that you're doing. So then you can start to grow and build the business and scale it to as big or as little as you want. You can keep it as a side business, which is likely my thing, because again, with my wife being a stay-at-home mom, I carry the medical benefits for us. So we have to have good medical benefits with her being a type 1 diabetic. So I do the 9 to 5, I teach. Luckily, I love teaching. So that's a great benefit for me, right? The medical benefits are great. So that takes care of my wife. But I make more money in my business than I do teaching. And that's because I've been able to grow and scale it over the past 5 or 6 years to a point where I can run it pretty efficiently with just myself, an occasional VA to help out. And then my wife does some of the bookkeeping and social media stuff from time to time. So it's been a great ride. I love it. I love where we're at. I don't have to be a 7-figure business. I'm totally fine with that. But in the end, it's just something I'm passionate about and I love so much that I could do this for the rest of my life and be totally happy. So I would recommend starting it as a side business, growing it as big as you can. If it gets so big you have to leave and do it full time, well, that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's why I think it's important to find a job you love, find something you really want to do and that you just love, and then make up whatever the difference is to get to your point with a side business or a side hustle. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
And maybe as I segue on to the next section, we have negotiation here. And I think oftentimes, especially getting as a new graduate, getting, you know, your first job in a clinical setting, we hear from students that are a little bit hesitant to even ask questions about trying to negotiate for a higher salary. And that's where spending a little bit of time on understanding the in and outs of the industry. How do hiring managers and how do companies make decisions on how they're going to pay their employees becomes really beneficial, because then you know that if they're offering you a base salary of X, you know that the industry could support an X salary of X plus something, right? And you can go very confidently say, well, I'm looking for a salary that matches my needs and my wants better, and it's this amount. And you're not making anything up. You understand the industry enough that you're talking numbers that are realistic.
Absolutely. And I think that you should always attempt a negotiation, right? But the timing is important, right? Don't ask for more money before you have a written offer in your hand. Nobody wants to hear about that in an interview process, right? Go through the interview process, see if the job is the right fit, get your offer, and then go from there. This is actually our last information slide. And it's a busy slide, but I think this is probably the most important information I did not learn in PT school. And this applies to OT, PT, SLP, and pretty much across the board. So the thing that you don't know is that oftentimes when, at least when I graduated, it was like, here's the average salary in a region. But then I would get an offer, and it would be an hourly offer, or it would be a pay-per-visit offer. So different setting types have different ways in which therapists or healthcare workers are generally paid, and that's tied to the type of reimbursement that setting is getting from the payer. So outpatient tends to be either salary or hourly. I did have an outpatient pay-per-visit offer. Actually, I had a job that was pediatric, and essentially that pay-per-visit means you only get paid if you complete the visit. So you may have 10 children or patients on your schedule, 8 of them may show up, you only get paid for 8 of them. On a rainy day, you may have 8 patients on your schedule, and you may get paid for 0 of those. So it was on one rainy day during a flood in October of 2015 where I had 0 patients show up. I get paid $0, and I started applying for new jobs that day because it was untenable at that point where I had so many loans to pay off. Later in my career, I had a pay-per-visit job, which I loved because I had enough multiple sources of income that I could have flexibility. If someone canceled, it wasn't the end of my world. So it tends to be salary or hourly. I also thought that salary was important, right? As an adult, I was like, I should have a yearly salary. I shouldn't be clocking in and out, right? But oftentimes in healthcare jobs, if you're on a salary position, they may say, I'm going to make you see 30 patients a day instead of whatever, and I'm just going to chunk as many people in there as I can, and you're going to make the same amount of money. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm making more money and giving you the same amount. So oftentimes in a high volume clinic, sometimes hourly can be better because you'll get paid that overtime should you go over your set out. So it's an important consideration. Of course, hourly and pay per visit, you're going to have less regularity, right? If you have a salary, every biweekly paycheck, you're going to get the same amount of money. It's very consistent. Hourly, if something happens, right, there's a storm, clinic closes, you don't clock in, clock out, you're not going to get those hours. Pay per visit, again, patients don't show, it's variable. So you can have those variable positions and make it work, but you have to sort of account for that. Inpatient is generally hourly, clock in, clock out, usually you have set hours. In inpatient, you might be full-time at 36 hours, you might be full-time at 40 hours, you might be full-time at 32 hours. It's all within whatever agreement you have when you go into in a hospital setting. Travel is probably its own presentation. Travel is generally a contract. There's usually a 12-ish week contract that you can extend. Dr. Feil has done travel therapy. We had a I lost my headset. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
So contract, you get paid a certain contract for that period of time. You might get stipends for housing. One big thing about contract that we discussed over the weekend, we had a similar presentation, is the medical benefits are often not covered when you're in the windows between contracts. So if you have extensive medical conditions that need regular care, and you can't have a gap without health insurance, you have to go on COBRA insurance, which is a very expensive type of coverage for that period. Dr. Feil, did you want to add about travel?
Yeah, I mean, again, don't let anyone tell you can't do it right out of school, because you can. I did, right? But you will basically learn a new electronic medical record every contract, or, so it'll be a different documentation setting. That's kind of probably the biggest hassle. You have to just be confident in yourself and in your skill set, knowing that you're probably going to be on your own little island most of the time. Like, as a contractor, like, it's kind of hard to like get in with the group and like, work with people sometimes, and, get up to speed with people sometimes. I did home health for 2 of my contracts. So I literally was on my own little island, and one of them happened to be in Hawaii. So again, was on my own little island. However, that being said, it was a blast. I loved it. I made a ton of money. I would have kept doing it, except I kind of got engaged and, married and kids, and life kind of got in the way, but really enjoyed it. would strongly recommend it. It's a good way to test different settings. It's a good way to test different cities and areas of the country if you're looking for maybe a place to live. So you can basically pick your location, the amount of money you want to make on a weekly basis, take home after taxes, or the setting, right? You basically can't do all three. You can usually get probably 2 out of the 3, but it's going to be tough to find the perfect setting in the perfect city making the perfect amount. So you have to kind of give a little bit there. But yeah, agreed. I didn't take any time off in between my contracts. I kept them flowing straight through so I wouldn't have that lapse in medical coverage. Yeah, I can't even imagine the COBRA pricing for medical coverage would have been, I'm sure, the price of a mortgage. So I wasn't going to do that. But I know people who do take breaks, in between the 13-week contracts or so. So yeah, I loved it. I would strongly recommend it if you're not terribly sure what you want to do yet. It's a great option and a good way to make money.
Awesome. And home health can be very variable in terms of payment. I had 2 full-time home health jobs and worked a little home health within the hospital setting I worked in. And I worked a pay-per-visit home health job in geriatrics. And you make a different amount based on the visit type you do. So we had 4 different payments based on 4 different visit types. So treatment, re-eval, eval, Oasis eval, they're all different. But at the time, the payment structure was such that I only had to see about 14 patients a week to make enough money to live. So it was a very generous treatment payment at the time. That might have changed a little bit with payment changes. The other thing to consider with home health is the reimbursement or availability of a car. So in one agency I worked for, I was given a home health car. It usually has some amount that's taken out of your paycheck, but it was a very small amount at the time, and the car had its own toll pass, had its own gas card. So that was a real luxury. I didn't put any mileage or wear and tear on my own vehicle. It was a real luxury. And then I had another job that you could either take a car from the company, but they'd take a substantial amount out of your salary for the year, or you could choose not to take the car. And so I had to do some math when I started and what that would look like. And I was actually going to do much better if I didn't take the car based on how much they were going to take out of my paycheck. So usually that's something that you discuss at offer. So you take a home health job and then you ask those questions about what those are like and what the salary differential would be. So say if they offered you a car, say, what would you give me if you didn't offer me a car? Like maybe you have a sweet hybrid or some sort of great car that you want to keep. Maybe you can get more income and not take the company car. Or maybe they give you a salary and you're like, I could do less salary, but I really want a car. Can you give me a gas card? Can you give me a toll? So those are all things you can also negotiate as well. SNF is usually pretty similar to inpatient from what I know. It's probably the only setting I don't have a lot of exposure to. Did any of y'all work in a SNF?
Yeah, that was where I came from. I did SNF and home health along with my own mobile physical therapy practice before going into academia. So SNF, yeah, is very, very similar to outpatient. Usually it's a salary type position. I mean, you can do hourly too. We had folks that were coming and doing hourly too, but those were generally PRN. I would say, skilled nursing facility to me is something that you really have to enjoy, and you have to love the setting. You have to love the population. And, for me, geriatrics has been my bread and butter for the longest time. So I truly enjoyed it. But they can generally pay pretty well if they are further out in the rural areas. So in a big city, you won't really get paid as much, but out in the rural areas where they really need it, you'll find especially travel contracts at SNFs pay very well because they can't get anybody to come all the way out there and work in these little podunk towns out in the middle of nowhere. So I did that in the middle of nowhere, Texas for my first contract, and they paid very well. And they asked if I wanted to stay longer, and I said, no, thank you. I'm heading to Hawaii. So that was that. But yeah, skilled nursing facility is a great place to work if you're really into the geriatric population. And like I said, can pay much, much higher if you're out there a little bit more rural.
Question in the chat about traveling. Would you actually recommend it as a new grad? Or get
Would you recommend traveling as a new grad or get years experience first to get your feet up under you? Well, again, it depends. I personally was confident enough in my skills and felt like I would figure it out. I knew enough that I could figure it out on the fly. So I went right into it. Could you work for a few years and get your feet wet and then go travel? Absolutely. It's really up to you and your comfort level. Do you feel confident enough to go out there and learn the ropes on your own a little bit? You'll have some people to go to. You can always, find mentors and people who've been out there for a little while. Ask other coworkers in the company that you're working for or whatever. I mean, you can always go back to your professors too. I've had students reach out to me and ask questions, after they've graduated. I'm totally fine with that. I'm always open to that. I let them know I'm a resource for you. Let me know. And I may not know the answer, but I know who I can send you to who does. So using your network and building your network is a great way to kind of help alleviate some of those fears you might have. If you don't feel confident enough to go out there on your own and learn on the fly a little bit and figure it out on your own, then yeah, no problem. Work a year or two and then go travel. It's totally it's self-dependent. It's all up to you. Where's your comfort level and how do you feel that you can handle it? For me, I was, a little bit older because I was an English major before I became a PT. So I had probably 2 years after I graduated, just getting my prereqs in. Then I did the master's program. Then I started the transitional doctorate. So I was a little bit older than the normal student, but I was just always pretty confident in my skills by the time I graduated. So that didn't even enter my mind. I wasn't even worried about that. I knew I was just going to figure it out no matter where I went. So.
Yeah, and if you did that activity at the beginning and you said, I'm interested in mentorship and community, then I would probably say maybe travel's not for you at this point, right? But if you wanted to make money and you wanted to try out different things, then that would fit, right? So kind of go back to your purpose there. Cash pay is often PTs that start their own practice are going to get paid cash, right? You determine what your rate is and people pay you. I'm going to put in my little 2 cents here. Just that my 2 areas of interest are financial literacy and equity and access, right? So if you're doing a cash pay business, you are catering your services to individuals that can pay for your service. So if you decide to have a cash pay service and are interested in equity access and that sort of thing, then consider how to incorporate maybe pro bono services into your work. I think there's a lot of people out there, especially on social media, that'll tell you the only way that you're going to survive as a healthcare worker these days is to start a cash pay business. It's not the only way you can survive. It can help that income. If you want to work with underserved populations, maybe do what Dr. Feil mentioned, right? Work in an underserved population and then make up the additional cost with a cash pay service. But just think about your why and just note that that's not the only way you can make it as a therapist. And if we all are going to make it that way, then we're really going to reduce our equitable services to the individuals that really need our care. So the last thing we have is question and answer. So whatever you guys have, chat or open it up.
Nothing. We did that great of a job explaining everything to you guys. You're now fully ready to go. I love it.
Well, we really appreciate your questions and your participation, but we'll hang out. If anyone has questions, you guys can ask questions privately if you'd prefer that. We'll just hang out until the last person leaves.
Yep. And you can always shoot us an email too. Feel free. I'm always available. Take questions all day, every day about this stuff. I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Would you also recommend looking at the banks we use for our financial plan? So I think that this question actually came up in a workshop we did this weekend. The biggest thing about either a recruiter or financial planner is finding someone that you trust, right? So it may take looking around. The other thing to consider is with financial planners or financial advisors, there's a number of different names to them. There are financial advisors that take a % of what you do, right? They'll actually monitor your assets, work with your assets and take a percentage of it.
and they're fee-only financial planners, right? So you visit them, you pay them a fee to give them you information. So that goes back to what really are you looking for? Are you looking for someone to really manage your assets and they're going to have some stake in that? Or do you just want a little bit of information? There's a lot of this that you can learn just by learning, right? There's financial literacy really is understanding enough so you can make decisions that are appropriate for your own being, right? So it's the same thing as being having clinical expertise, right? Clinical reasoning. You know enough to make the appropriate decisions for your patients. So financial literacy is learning, going to these resources, learning, thinking about what that means for you, and then making the appropriate decision for you. If you have complicated assets, if you have complicated situations, that's when a financial advisor is really helpful. Right. I haven't used one myself, partially because my husband thinks he is one. He is not. But in the meantime, I've learned things so that now we can have conversations together about the choices that we make. Not everyone will need one. If you feel confident with your decisions, go for it. But if it's complicated and you want to work through some of those options with someone that you trust, those people that we mentioned are people that are really immersed in student loan information. Both of them are really great. So you can get to try around, ask questions, things like that.
And when it comes to banks, just my 2 cents on what I've seen with owning my own businesses, small local banks will do much, much better than the larger banks. Your Chase, your Bank of America, your Wells Fargo, they have a lot of fees associated with them. They, really great, not great customer service. Whereas local banks and credit unions do an amazing job taking care of their well, not only their clients, but their business owner clients as well. No real fees. They're doing everything they can to hold on to their clients in a small town type situation. A lot of times the downside would be, obviously they don't have, ATMs all over the country and all over the world, but a lot of times they'll waive the fees on those just because they know, hey, we don't have the ATMs, but whatever fee they pay, we'll pay it back and waive it for you or whatever. They find ways to kind of be competitive, but I found that interest rates are much better through them. Perks and bonuses are much better through them. It's just, small local banks and credit unions. I would always check those out first just to see, but definitely shop around when you're looking for a bank to work with long term. Oh, certificate for tonight. Madeline, do you want to drop that link one more time for the certificate?
And it's it's a link and you can sign your attendance and they'll give you the badge or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Any other questions? PRN starting a business as a new grad. So I will say that, again, it goes back to what your purpose is. Things to know about PRN positions. Generally, they make higher than your hourly rate you would get, but they're usually conditions, right? So if I were to say PRN in a hospital, I would say, yes, I will be available and I'm guaranteeing that I'll work 2 holidays a year and I'm going to work at least 3 Saturdays or something, whatever the conditions are of the organization. And it's variable hours, right? So this is something that actually there are like PTs, OTs or whatever that are like PRN PTs or whatever that are on social media where they'll like be very honest about what their lifestyle is like. So that can be helpful to see if that's up for you. Again, that's variable income. You're never going to really know what you're going to make. And starting a business is variable. So there are 2 variable incomes that you just don't know what it's going to look like. Starting your own business is going to have some form of startup costs, right? May not be a lot, but you're going to have liability insurance that you might purchase as if you worked for an organization, but you might not, because usually it carries it with we had a long conversation the other day about whether or not you should have liability insurance in an organization. It's not super expensive, but it's a cost. And then whatever you need to run that business is going to be a startup cost. So it's a variable business with variable business and a startup cost. So for me, that would be risky, but it would depend on what your financial situation was and how much risk you wanted to take. If you have I'm going to say one more thing and I'll be quiet. If you have student loans that have an interest associated with them, the faster you can make headway on that interest, the less it'll be overall. So if you say I'm going to pay very little on my loans at the beginning and more over time, it's going to accumulate more than if you pay more at the beginning and less over time. And you're not going to be able to qualify for some of that. Like you can't qualify for a governmental loan forgiveness program, like a 10-year program, if you're working as just PRN, because you won't have enough hours usually, and then as a business, but other opinions welcome.
So it depends on what you need out of it too, right? If you don't need medical benefits and like 401k or whatever is not that important to you, PRN can be great because it pays a very, pretty high rate. So it's a good way to kind of make some money. And then, again, doing your own business on the side, you can kind of grow and scale that and try to focus on that and make that your main thing, your main gig. But that being said, I couldn't do that because I need the medical benefits, right? And I need good medical benefits, not just any medical benefits. So for me, the last 5 years out of my 16-year career have been spent finding the best bang for my buck that allows me to work the least amount of hours. So like 32 hours, full time would be great. Get the most amount of medical benefits that I pay the least for. And so far, the university's been the best I've had ever. So, low deductibles, not much to pay in. And, again, luckily the 9 to 5 is a great gig too that I enjoy. So really, I've gotten the dream job at this point. I've really, gotten to a really good point in my life. But yeah, it really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. PRN is also good to kind of get some reps in, get your feet wet, and you roll your sleeves up and get in the trenches there and work with patients, get your hands on people, see what a system looks like, and really increase your patient care while you're trying to build and grow your own thing on the side.
And you can also, PRN in a hospital is going to pay a lot less than PRN in home health, right? So if you worked PRN in home health and maybe had multiple PRN jobs, again, not needing those medical benefits, then you could scale down or say no to visits as your business scaled, which is an option, but again, no medical benefits. And you're going to make PRN hospital rates are like, at least in Austin, are really low. So you really need to consider what setting you're doing PRN in.
Yeah, there's some cities that will really lowball their healthcare providers because people just want to live in that city, so they'll accept lower contracts. Austin happens to be one of them, unfortunately. I know Pittsburgh is another one that struggles. There's a lot of people there in Pittsburgh that are not getting paid a good enough value. A couple out in California are a little bit tougher, I know, because again, a lot of people want to work there and the cost of living is high, so it's a double whammy. You just got to test the waters. You got to ask around. I like using my network. I like asking people that live in that area, what the going rates are. There are some resources available. UpDoc Media, Ben Fung and Gene Schrockabroad put out a report every year or two about data that they're getting from people that are self-reporting different salaries and different settings in different cities. So that's a good resource too. If you look up UpDoc Media, they have a good one. Free resource. You just put in your email and they send it to you. So there's a lot of ways to figure it out, but I would definitely shop around and just see what's a good acceptable rate for what you're trying to do.
Thank you for coming. We really appreciate the questions.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been fun, as always.
Any other questions? Kind of when I'm not sure if you guys are still there or have walked away.
I'm here. I'm just filling out my certificate.
Okay, awesome.
That's fair. We'll allow it.
Okay.
I'll drop my email in the chat here if anybody has any further questions. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always down to talk about this stuff. Mine's very simple. ffeil@usa.edu. All right, crew. Well, it's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you
Good
guys
stuff.
so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great evening.
Have a good evening.